The grand ballroom of Ashbourne House shimmered like a jewel beneath the collective glow of 100 candles, their flames dancing in the polished mirrors that lined the walls. The scent of roses and wax mingled with the faint, intoxicating trace of perfume from 100 women, each one a portrait of elegance, each one whispering secrets behind gloved hands. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb stood near the edges of the crowd, a solitary figure in a gown of muted sapphire silk, her posture rigid yet unconsciously commanding. Despite the glittering assembly, she seemed detached, as if the murmuring ton and their eager eyes could scarcely touch her. She had long grown weary of such gatherings, these grand rituals where smiles concealed ambition, and laughter carried subtle barbs. The whispers reached her ears before she could see their source. "Did you hear?" one lady murmured to another, her fan fluttering like a bird trapped in gilded cage. "Miss Whitcomb, some say she is far too proud for a daughter of her father's modest estate." Eleanor felt a familiar prickle of shame, but she refused to bend to it. Her father's modesty had never stifled her mind nor her spirit, and she would not allow the ton's idle speculation to dictate her worth. Her hands remained calm, folded neatly in front of her, though her pulse quickened. She had faced society's whispers countless times and had learned to treat them as background music, annoying, persistent, but ultimately irrelevant. Yet this evening held a tension she had not anticipated. Among the guests strode a figure whose reputation preceded him, the Duke of Ashford. Tall, impeccably poised, his dark hair slicked back to reveal a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to measure the world with equal parts calculation and curiosity. He was known for his arrogance, for the countless women he captivated and discarded with the casual flick of a hand. When he approached, the room seemed to tilt slightly, as though the chandeliers themselves paused to observe the encounter. Eleanor's heart, despite her careful composure, felt a small, unwelcome flutter. "Lady Eleanor," the Duke said, bowing with a precision that left no room for insincerity. His voice was low, smooth, and teasing in the way that made polite society feel like a stage. "I hear you have been the subject of some spirited conversation." He allowed a faint smile to curl his lips, one that suggested both amusement and challenge. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "I am rarely the subject of conversation by choice, Your Grace," she replied, her tone measured, courteous, yet imbued with a firmness that bespoke her unwillingness to yield. The murmurs of nearby guests swelled for a moment before faltering under the weight of the exchange, like birds startled from their perch. He stepped closer, deliberately reducing the distance between them. "I can hire countless people like you," he said, his words carrying the arrogance of a man accustomed to taking what he desired. The statement was intended to wound, to remind her that the world was vast and that her pride might be nothing against the power of his station. Eleanor's response was instantaneous, sharp, and unwavering. "Do it," she said, the two words cutting through the murmuring crowd. And then, without waiting for his reaction, she turned and walked away, the swish of her silk gown announcing her departure with elegant defiance. Heads turned, whispers multiplied, and the faint gasp of surprise lingered in the air as if the chandeliered room itself had drawn a sharp breath. The Duke remained standing, the faintest crease of surprise forming between his brows. Few had spoken to him in such a manner, and fewer still had dared to turn away without the smallest tremor of fear or hesitation. A spark of interest, something beyond mere amusement or irritation, flickered in his eyes. This woman, with her unyielding posture and unspoken challenge, had struck at a curiosity he had not felt in years, a curiosity that promised neither immediate conquest nor casual diversion. Eleanor moved through the ballroom with careful grace, acknowledging no one, yet somehow commanding attention by her very refusal to seek it. She passed beneath the glowing chandeliers, past clusters of ladies clutching fans with anxious fingers and gentlemen whose eyes followed her every step. The music swelled, an elegant waltz, and she allowed the rhythm to guide her pace though she did not join the dance. Every gaze upon her felt like a weight, yet she bore it with the quiet dignity that had long been her armor. Once outside, the night air hit her with the crisp clarity of early winter. The cobblestone streets gleamed under a faint drizzle, reflecting the gas lamps that flickered like lonely sentinels. She paused for a moment, drawing in the chill air, allowing it to wash away the tension of the ballroom. Yet even as she walked toward her carriage, a subtle unease lingered, the certainty that the Duke would not simply let the evening end. Inside the carriage, Eleanor sat upright, her gloved hands folded neatly on her lap. The wheels clattered against the rain-slick stones, and the muffled sounds of London nightlife passed by like whispers from another world. Her mind, however, was not on the streets or the passing lamps but on the encounter she could not easily dismiss. The Duke's audacity, his unspoken interest, gnawed at her as much as it intrigued her. There was a danger in his attention, a possibility that her independence might be tested in ways she had not yet imagined. Yet Eleanor also recognized a strange exhilaration. For the first time in many months, perhaps years, someone had met her pride with a challenge that was not merely societal but personal. Her pulse, steady in public, now betrayed the faintest hint of excitement. She allowed herself a single, measured breath, acknowledging the stirrings of emotion she could neither name nor control. Back in the ballroom, the Duke lingered, his eyes tracing the path Eleanor had taken. He had anticipated a polite rebuke, perhaps a hint of fear or hesitation, but not this unabashed defiance. And though he had no intention of immediate pursuit in the public eye, the determination settling into his expression was unmistakable. Eleanor Whitcomb would not be forgotten, and the intrigue she had sparked in him promised to endure beyond the flicker of candlelight and the murmur of whispers. As the carriage rolled away into the London night, Eleanor's figure receding into shadow, the ballroom slowly returned to its previous rhythm. Yet the air was different now. Every guest sensed, if only subconsciously, that a story had begun, one that would unfold in whispered corridors, rain-slicked streets, and the uncharted spaces between pride and desire. It was a story that demanded attention, not merely for its scandal, but for the extraordinary woman at its center. And though she did not yet know it, the Duke's pursuit would become a defining force in her life, an inescapable collision of honor, curiosity, and the first sparks of something far more dangerous and irresistible: love. The night pressed on, yet the echo of that brief confrontation lingered in every corner, in every glance exchanged, in every whispered word of speculation. Eleanor Whitcomb had stepped into the storm with courage as her shield and defiance as her banner, and the winds of change had begun to stir. The Duke, watching from the shadowed threshold of the ballroom, understood that the pursuit he now contemplated would demand patience, strategy, and perhaps a surrender of his own carefully curated pride. For this woman was unlike any other he had met, and the rules of society, long his allies, were powerless against her indomitable spirit. The stage was set, the players defined, and the first act of their entwined fates had concluded. Eleanor's dignity remained intact, her defiance unbroken, and the Duke's curiosity had been irreversibly piqued. Beyond the glow of chandeliers and the distant toll of midnight bells, a story of challenge, pursuit, and forbidden fascination had begun, promising an intricate dance between pride and passion, societal expectation and personal desire, a story that would refuse to end quietly, and one which, in time, neither participant would be able to ignore. The morning after the ballroom encounter arrived with a pale, hesitant light that filtered through Eleanor's curtains, brushing her face with gentle insistence. She sat at her writing desk, quill poised but idle, a faint crease of contemplation etched between her brows. Her thoughts refused to settle. The Duke's words and unyielding gaze lingered, haunting the edges of her consciousness like a melody half-remembered. She had always prided herself on control, on measured composure, yet the audacity of his challenge, the careless confidence, stirred an unfamiliar restlessness in her chest. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. Eleanor rose and crossed the room, her slippers whispering against the polished floor, to receive a small parcel, tied with silk ribbon in the precise shade of deep violet. No signature marked its delicate wrapping, yet she knew immediately its sender. With hands steady despite the flutter of anticipation, she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside rested a rare edition of poetry, the kind prized for its intricate verses and binding of fine leather. She drew in a breath, reading the small, neat inscription upon the flyleaf: "For those whose spirit cannot be purchased but must be earned." Her lips curved with the faintest smile, an acknowledgement of the unspoken challenge nestled in those words. It was a token, simple yet daring, a gesture meant to pierce the armor of pride she maintained so carefully. Eleanor understood immediately that the Duke's attention was neither idle nor fleeting. It was deliberate, a slow and insistent pursuit. She felt a curious mix of defiance and intrigue, as though the world had shifted imperceptibly while she slept, tilting toward a path she had not chosen but could not now ignore. Later that afternoon, Eleanor found herself at Lady Caraway's tea, the soft clink of porcelain filling the air like punctuation to endless conversation. The room was a tapestry of silks and lace, the scent of freshly cut flowers mingling with delicate pastries arranged in precise rows. Yet beneath the surface of polite laughter and genteel commentary, the undercurrent of scandal rippled like a hidden current. A whispered story reached Eleanor's ears, delivered in the sharp, conspiratorial tone that only the tongue could master. One of the younger aristocrats had been observed in a compromising situation, and rumors threatened to implicate her, indirectly, by association. Eleanor's pulse quickened, though she maintained the calm poise expected of her station. She rose, curtsied lightly to the ladies nearest her, and replied to inquiries with neutral civility, her voice even, her eyes alert. "I assure you the tale is greatly exaggerated," she said, though the words were more for her own comfort than for persuasion. In the eyes of polite society, reputation was a currency as vital as coin, and Eleanor was determined to protect her own with vigilance and grace. The threat of scandal, subtle as it was, sparked a tension within her, one she could not simply dismiss. The arrival of the Duke's messenger later that evening offered a reprieve of sorts, though it came wrapped in its own layer of intrigue. Another parcel, this one containing a small, exquisite bouquet of garden blooms, each chosen for its symbolism. The card bore a single line: "Even amidst whispers, beauty persists where it is recognized." Eleanor held the blooms to her chest, the petals brushing her cheek like a caress. She felt the contradiction within herself, part admiration, part irritation, and beneath it all, a pulse of something unspoken and urgent. That evening, the rain fell in gentle sheets across the city, painting cobblestones with silver streaks. Eleanor, unable to resist curiosity, ventured into the garden behind her home, the fragrance of damp earth and roses mingling with the soft patter of rain. She imagined the Duke pacing similar gardens, plotting his next gesture, calculating the slow unraveling of the game he had begun. She hated the power he seemed to hold over her attention, yet she could not entirely disavow it. Each interaction, each token, each carefully chosen word forced her to confront an emotion she had long kept at bay: fascination. Days passed, each marked by subtle and deliberate gestures from the Duke. A carriage left at the corner of her estate bore a rare manuscript. A note pinned to a painting hinted at secrets she could scarcely guess. Each arrival tightened the invisible thread between them, drawing Eleanor ever closer into the orbit of his intent. And yet, for all the intrigue, she remained cautious, aware that the world would judge any misstep harshly. Her independence was a treasure, hard-won and fiercely guarded, and she refused to allow sentiment alone to compromise it. A particularly insistent whisper arrived from a distant cousin, carried through the corridors of polite society. "The Duke's attentions grow bold. Some say he intends more than mere amusement," the cousin said, lowering her voice as though the walls themselves might betray the secret. Eleanor's gaze, sharp and calculating, met that of her confidant, the unspoken acknowledgement that rumor was both weapon and warning. She felt the weight of expectation pressing from every side, yet she stood resolute, knowing that a woman's reputation, fragile as it was, could only be defended with both grace and strategy. One evening, a carriage ride brought her to the countryside, a brief retreat from the scrutiny of the city. The estate sprawled with manicured gardens, the air heavy with the scent of wet soil and distant blooms. Here, away from the crowded ballrooms and whispering salons, Eleanor found a moment of clarity. She walked along stone paths glistening from recent rain, considering the tokens, the subtle gestures, and the relentless curiosity of the Duke. She realized with both alarm and excitement that she had been drawn into a narrative larger than her own intentions, a story that demanded careful navigation, shrewd perception, and a willingness to confront the stirrings of her heart. It was in the library that evening, amidst shelves lined with leather-bound volumes and the warm glow of a single lamp, that Eleanor finally allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement. The Duke's pursuit was no mere formality. Each token, each thoughtful gift, each carefully phrased message carried the unmistakable weight of intent. And yet, as much as she recognized it, she remained vigilant, determined to protect her independence while understanding, reluctantly, that intrigue had a power all its own. In the quiet solitude of her room that night, Eleanor placed the bouquet on the desk beside the book, her fingers brushing petals and leather in deliberate contemplation. She understood that the story unfolding between herself and the Duke was not one of idle amusement. It was a game of wits and restraint, a subtle dance measured in glances, gestures, and the faintest hints of shared understanding. Society's expectations loomed like ever-present specters, yet Eleanor felt the first stirrings of a willingness to meet them not with mere defiance, but with a carefully considered engagement of her own spirit. The scandal, subtle yet persistent, continued to ripple through polite circles, yet Eleanor faced it with a steadiness that only strengthened her allure. Her intellect, combined with her poise, rendered her both formidable and fascinating. The Duke's pursuit, carefully measured and deliberate, became a challenge she could not ignore. She recognized, with the faintest thrill of anticipation, that their interactions were transforming from the superficiality of society into something far more intimate and consequential. a silent, ongoing dialogue conducted through tokens, gestures, and unspoken understanding. By the end of the week, the garden outside her estate shimmered beneath a soft drizzle, reflecting the pale winter light like scattered diamonds. Eleanor stood by the window, gazing upon the wet paths, the carefully pruned hedges, and the faint glow of lanterns along the carriageway. She held the Duke's tokens close in her memory, contemplating their meaning and the implications for her own heart. A subtle, unspoken realization had taken root. The Duke's pursuit was neither trivial nor casual, and the path ahead promised challenges both societal and personal. She exhaled softly, allowing the rain-scented air to fill her lungs, a mixture of resolve and reluctant curiosity swelling within her. In the quiet of that winter evening, the first threads of their story had been woven, delicate yet unbreakable, binding pride, fascination, and the thrill of forbidden intimacy into a tapestry that neither could yet fully comprehend. The Duke's attentions had escalated, the scandal had threatened, and Eleanor had navigated both with grace and discernment. And as the night deepened, she understood with a clarity that was both unsettling and exhilarating. The dance had begun, and neither of them would emerge unchanged. The library of Ashbourne Manor was hushed, the kind of quiet that invited confession and concealed truths beneath its velvet shadows. Outside, a late autumn storm battered the windows, the rain striking in hurried, uneven rhythms that echoed the thrum of Eleanor's pulse. She had arrived under the pretense of a social call, yet the weight of curiosity and the subtle insistence of the Duke's previous gestures had drawn her into a space she had never imagined sharing with him. The scent of old leather and candle wax mingled with the faint trace of rain-soaked earth drifting through a half-open window, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation. The Duke stood near the fireplace, one hand resting lightly on the mantel, the other tucked behind his back, as if measuring both the room and the visitor before him. His dark eyes, normally confident and teasing, carried a rare vulnerability now, a shadow that made the bold man of society appear almost mortal. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turbulence between them, as though nature itself recognized the precarious tension of this moment. Eleanor's gaze swept over him, noting the slight crease of his brow, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way the flickering firelight animated his features with an intimacy she had not yet permitted herself to feel. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his voice lower than in the public salons, softened by the privacy and the weight of unspoken thoughts. "I trust the week has treated you with the civility you deserve, though I suspect the ton has been less than kind." There was no mockery in his tone, no casual amusement, only the candid observation of a man who measured both words and intentions carefully. Eleanor inclined her head, acknowledging the truth in his statement without betraying her inner tumult. "It has been tolerable," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. "The whispers continue, though I have long grown accustomed to their persistence. One learns to navigate society as a ship learns the currents, gently, without surrendering control." Her eyes did not leave his, daring him to see the strength beneath her composed exterior. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them with the silent authority of a man used to command yet tempered by the intimacy of the moment. "And yet," he murmured, "you endure not only whispers but my relentless interference." His gaze softened, though it retained its intensity, a kind of magnetism that drew her attention as inexorably as the tide. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, a subtle heat rising in her cheeks, but she remained steadfast, aware that surrender in this exchange would be measured in words, not impulses. "Your interference is notable," she replied, her tone balanced between acknowledgement and restraint. "I am grateful for the consideration, if not entirely convinced of the necessity." The faintest quirk of a smile crossed her lips, a silent challenge that hinted at the complexity beneath her polite exterior. The Duke's eyes darkened imperceptibly, a mixture of admiration and exasperation reflecting in their depths. He moved closer still, until the space between them was charged with the unspoken, the room itself seeming to shrink around the intensity of their shared presence. "Consider this," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "I have sought counsel, entertainment, amusement from many quarters, yet none have matched the singularity of your mind, Lady Eleanor. None have challenged me in the way you do." His admission hung in the air, fragile and dangerous, as though a single misstep could shatter its delicate honesty. Eleanor's breath caught imperceptibly, though she maintained her composed posture. "You speak as though I am some curiosity to be examined and admired, rather than a woman with her own claims upon dignity and purpose," she said softly yet firmly. The firelight glimmered on her eyes, revealing a depth of intelligence and emotion that few had the patience, or the audacity, to notice. He regarded her for a long moment, the silence between them thick with unspoken words and restrained desire. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he confessed, "Perhaps that is precisely why I cannot dismiss you. You do not bend, do not beg for attention or approval, yet you are impossible to ignore. I find myself unsettled by the thought of you beyond these walls." The admission, carefully chosen yet profoundly intimate, struck Eleanor with the weight of truth she had not expected to encounter. Her own defenses trembled under the force of his candor. She had faced society's expectations, whispers of scandal, and the relentless gaze of the ton, yet here was a man who saw her, not as a daughter, a lady, or a subject of gossip, but as a person whose thoughts and passions mattered. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar ache of longing, tempered by the ingrained caution she had cultivated over years of navigating a world where emotion could be weaponized as easily as charm. "I cannot say that your words leave me unaffected, Your Grace," she admitted, her voice steady though her heart betrayed her with subtle urgency. "Nor can I deny the curiosity they inspire. Yet I remain wary, for the world watches with a relentless eye, and my choices carry consequences far beyond my own comfort." She held his gaze, unwavering, conveying a mixture of honesty, strength, and a vulnerability she had rarely allowed to surface. The Duke stepped closer, closing the last measure of distance between them, yet respecting the unspoken boundary that still lingered. "I understand," he said softly, his tone a careful balance of reassurance and intensity. "But know this, Lady Eleanor, the world's eyes are indifferent to truth when it contradicts desire. I see you and I cannot unsee you. And I would rather face society's judgment than deny the gravity of what I feel." His hand hovered near hers, a gesture both daring and reverent, acknowledging intimacy without transgression. Eleanor's mind raced, grappling with the implications of his confession. Her own pride, cultivated through years of careful self-discipline, urged caution. Yet a part of her, small but insistent, recognized the rare and extraordinary nature of this acknowledgement. Here was a man accustomed to power, to superficial admiration, who now revealed a vulnerability that mirrored her own guarded heart. She felt the stirrings of something dangerous and irresistible, a bridge between pride and passion, restraint and desire. For several long minutes they stood thus, the storm outside echoing the tension within the room, the rain tapping against the windows like a delicate percussion to their unspoken thoughts. Finally, Eleanor exhaled, a quiet surrender not of impulse but of acknowledgement. "Your words compel me to reconsider what I had deemed certain," she admitted, her voice softening, a subtle concession to the fragile intimacy forming between them. "Yet I caution you, Your Grace, such truths, once spoken, demand care in their cultivation." He inclined his head, a faint, approving smile touching his lips. "I would tread carefully, yes," he said, "for I value both your trust and your spirit. But know that my intention is neither frivolous nor fleeting. This, whatever it may become, is measured, deliberate, and wholly yours to accept or deny." Eleanor allowed a small, thoughtful nod, the faintest acknowledgement that she was no longer merely a participant in polite society's choreography, but a co-author in a narrative shaped by courage, honesty, and the first fragile sparks of mutual understanding. She felt the first tremor of anticipation for what might follow, a subtle thrill that promised challenge, revelation, and perhaps the possibility of something neither of them had yet dared to name. The storm outside began to abate, leaving the world cleansed and quiet, the library's shadows softened by flickering candlelight. Eleanor took a deliberate step back, regaining the composure she had cultivated over a lifetime, yet with a newfound awareness. The Duke's confession had altered the landscape of their relationship, rendering society's whispers inconsequential compared to the weight of this shared understanding. As she prepared to depart, the Duke offered a gesture at once protective and intimate, bowing slightly while allowing the faintest touch of his gloved hand to hover near hers. "Until next we meet, Lady Eleanor," he murmured, each word deliberate, laden with significance. "Until then, Your Grace," she replied, her tone steady but her heart betraying a hint of the storm that had passed within. The door closed behind her, leaving the library bathed in firelight, the scent of rain and candle mingling, a silent witness to the confession exchanged within its walls. Outside, the world awaited, but within that room a turning point had been reached. Pride met honesty, fascination met restraint, and the first, delicate threads of intimacy had been woven into the tapestry of their shared story. Neither would be the same again. The spring air carried a freshness that seemed almost unnatural after the long gray months of winter. Yet in Eleanor's garden, it was as though the season itself had conspired to mark this day with subtle grandeur. Cherry blossoms hung like clouds from their boughs, petals drifting lazily on the breeze, and the gravel paths gleamed with the promise of a sun just beginning to pierce the morning mist. Eleanor moved along the winding lanes with deliberate calm, yet beneath her composed exterior anticipation thrummed like a taut string. Today would be unlike any other day, for the Duke had summoned her with the singularity of purpose that had, for months, marked his attentions. He awaited her at the far end of the garden, the distance between them softened by a lattice arch adorned with climbing roses. The Duke of Ashford stood in the early light, the tailored lines of his coat catching the sun, his posture both commanding and unguarded. The fire that had always simmered in his gaze now burned steadily, steady as a lantern against the encroaching shadows of convention and expectation. Eleanor's pulse quickened, yet she maintained the dignity that had always been her shield, aware that the culmination of their shared story demanded equal measures of courage and grace. "Lady Eleanor," he said, stepping forward in a manner that suggested both resolve and reverence, "I have no pretense of ceremony today. No whispers, no games, no tokens to hide my intention. I have come to speak plainly, for the moment has long demanded it." His voice, low and unwavering, carried a weight that silenced the birdsong and made the rustle of petals seem inconsequential. Eleanor's lips pressed into a line of calm, but the faintest quiver betrayed her own anticipation. "You speak with gravity," she replied, her voice steady but imbued with unspoken emotion. "I am not unaccustomed to weighty words, Your Grace, yet I confess curiosity tempers my caution." Her eyes met his fully, and in that moment the world beyond the garden, the salons, the gossip, the ton's relentless gaze, faded into irrelevance. He drew a slow breath, as if weighing each word against the certainty of his desire. "Curiosity, yes," he murmured, "but let it be accompanied by truth. Lady Eleanor, I have pursued you not merely because the tongue whispers or because intrigue demands, but because you, your mind, your spirit, your unwavering independence, have compelled me beyond the trivialities of society. I love you with a constancy that has grown with every glance, every conversation, every silent acknowledgement of what we might yet share." Eleanor's breath caught, a subtle warmth flooding her chest, yet she maintained her measured composure. The declaration, simple in its clarity, carried a force that neither ceremony nor expectation could diminish. She felt the culmination of months' worth of tension, tokens, and quiet understanding crystallize into a single moment where the possibility of surrender was no longer shameful but inevitable. "Your Grace," she said softly, "your words are both reckless and sincere, a combination I cannot lightly dismiss. I have guarded my spirit as one guards a fragile treasure, wary of those who would covet it for fleeting amusement. Yet I recognize in you a constancy rare among men of station, a willingness to meet strength with strength rather than flattery or imposition." Her voice, though calm, carried an undercurrent of emotion, a delicate tension between pride and longing. He took a deliberate step closer, the space between them charged with the intimacy of months' accumulation. "I would never ask for what I am not prepared to cherish," he said. "Nor would I presume that affection is granted lightly. But here, under the open sky and beyond the scrutiny of the world, I ask you to consider a future that honors both your independence and the affection I bear." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over the familiar strength and unexpected vulnerability in his expression. The world had demanded patience, discretion, and a careful navigation of society's expectations, and she had complied with all. Yet here, in the quiet clarity of morning, she realized that love was not a concession but a choice, a deliberate, conscious engagement with risk, with emotion, and with possibility. "I have measured the risks," she admitted, her voice firm yet tender. "I have weighed the consequences of yielding, not for fear of scandal, but for the preservation of my own dignity. And now I choose," she said, her words deliberate, carrying both the authority of self-possession and the warmth of acknowledgement, "to accept the truth of what we share, to allow both heart and mind to meet in this understanding." A faint smile curved the Duke's lips, and for the first time, Eleanor saw the unrestrained relief and joy that her acknowledgement had granted him. He extended his hand, an invitation and a promise intertwined, and she accepted it, her fingers brushing his with the faintest spark of connection that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Together, they stood beneath the arch of blossoms, the petals drifting like soft snow around them, the sun now fully asserting its warmth against the chill of the morning. "Then it is agreed," he murmured, his voice low and steady, "that we shall face the world as partners in defiance of rumor and expectation, yet bound by mutual respect and affection. I offer not ownership but devotion, not command but partnership. Shall we, Lady Eleanor?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady and luminous, carrying the weight of choice and the thrill of recognition. As partners and in truth. The simplicity of the word belied the months of intrigue, tension, and carefully measured gestures that had led to this precise moment. Here, pride and passion found their equilibrium, and society's whispers could no longer dictate the rhythm of their hearts. The morning sun now fully illuminated the garden, casting long shadows that intertwined like fingers, symbolic of the union forming between them. The Duke's gaze held hers, unwavering and reverent, a mirror of the trust and courage required to sustain both love and individuality in a world that demanded compromise. Eleanor, standing tall and composed, felt the first flush of unguarded exhilaration, a quiet triumph not only of the heart but of spirit. In the days that followed, society would murmur and speculate, yet the careful authenticity of their engagement rendered gossip powerless. Their interactions, once measured in tokens and subtle glances, now carried the quiet confidence of mutual understanding. Every gesture, every shared smile, became an affirmation of choice, courage, and the delicate balance between independence and intimacy. The garden remained their sanctuary, a place where petals fell like whispered promises and sunlight danced over faces that had learned to recognize truth in one another. They walked together along winding paths, spoke in voices softened by privacy yet strengthened by honesty, and allowed themselves the simple joy of companionship without pretense. The months of tension, pursuit, and careful navigation had culminated in a partnership neither could have anticipated but both had earned through patience, courage, and unwavering authenticity. Eleanor, standing beneath the arch of roses with his hand lightly clasped in hers, understood fully that the world's judgment was inconsequential compared to the depth of recognition and love she now shared with the Duke. The story that had begun with whispers, challenges, and tokens had arrived at a resolution that honored both their spirits, a testament to restraint, intelligence, and the quiet power of mutual respect. As the sun climbed higher, casting warmth upon the garden and illuminating the delicate petals that fell around them, the Duke of Ashford spoke once more, softly, reverently, "Together, Lady Eleanor, in truth, in courage, and in devotion." She smiled, her heart unburdened and luminous, and replied with equal conviction, "Together, Your Grace, and in all that we choose to be." The garden held its quiet witness as petals drifted, the air carrying the faint scent of blossoms and the promise of enduring love. Here, beneath the spring sky, two spirits met in perfect accord, neither diminished by society nor restrained by expectation, but elevated by choice, courage, and the rare, abiding recognition of one another's soul. In that moment, Eleanor Whitcomb and the Duke of Ashford became more than figures of whispered rumor. They became partners in a shared narrative of respect, devotion, and profound love. The world might watch, might speculate, might attempt to impose its judgments, yet the truth between them remained unassailable, radiant, and eternal.